Welcome back to Reddit Aliens, everyone. I'm John, hello, and today a pretty straightforward topic, so let's get right to it. What's the creepiest experience you've ever had when you're alone? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I was walking home from my bar one night when I was at uni and heard what sounded like a blood-curdling female scream. I was absolutely petrified, made a cursory glance to see if I could easily see what was going on, but when I couldn't see anyone, I sprinted home. It was only months later that I saw a video online and realized what it was. It was an effing fox. Their screams are horrifying. This happened a few years ago. It was about 9 p.m. and I was returning from practice. I would say I'm a pretty paranoid guy and usually overthink stuff. As I was walking down the road, I had this terrible gut feeling, like my heart dropped. I immediately felt like I should look behind me. I turned around and saw a man, pretty muscular, around mid-30s, staring at me. I froze and suddenly the same gut feeling returned. I don't know why, but I had that urge to scream. The guy actually took off running, probably because he thought I was calling for help. When I got home, I told my parents. I was 14 at the time, and we called the police. A few days later, a police officer knocks on our door and starts asking me questions. He had a picture of the guy from that night. I could tell it was him due to him being bald and from his muscular body. It turns out they had already caught the guy and just wanted to confirm if it was him. I later find out this guy has been guilty of murder, molestation, etc. He was also carrying a knife the night I saw him. Really messed up guy. When it was night, I always heard my mother coughing downstairs. One weekend, my parents and my brother went on a trip together and I was home alone, and I heard the coughing. So it was not my mom. Me and my mom saw someone or something watching asleep. I was about 5 or 6 years old, and my mom was putting me to sleep. I fell asleep, and when I woke up in the middle of the night, I saw a dark figure like a man standing in front of the window. I woke my mom up almost to cry, and I was hoping it was just a tree or something, because we were on the second floor of the house. But when she woke up, she also saw what happened and told me to stay put and don't move. She quickly ran to the living room because we had guests over and everyone was still drinking. She told me everyone what happened, and for 3 hours everyone went out and searched around the house. What I didn't tell her was that when she left the window started rattling as if someone was trying to open it. I was scared and never slept on my own in that room until I was 8. Once my grandma was out of town to visit my uncle who lives in another state. I was watering her plants, feeding her dog, checking her mail, all that stuff. I went inside and her TV was turned on, turned it off, went into a different part of the house to water the plants she kept in a den-like area, walked back through the living room and the TV was on again. This time, the golf network. My pap loved napping to golf, like every other 60-something on the planet. Turned it off and went about my business. Came back a few days later to repeat this routine and some of her figurines had been turned around. He'd sometimes do this because it annoyed my grandma. Probably not creepy, but it makes me chuckle. Well, I can say with confidence and experience that it's not just 60-year-old men who can nap while golf is on. When I was a kid, I used to spend a lot of time alone in my basement. We had a TV down there, so I was down there pretty late most nights in the summer. One pretty late night, I swear I heard rustling from behind me, but when I turned around, there was nothing there. I felt a really sharp breath on the back of my neck, hard enough to blow my hair. Took off up the stairs, leaving everything on downstairs. I grabbed my mom and we went back downstairs to check it out. Everything was turned off. I didn't hang out downstairs anymore. It was my parents' basement when I was visiting home during uni. I thought it was haunted. Stuff would vanish or seem to move on its own. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps upstairs when no one was home and investigate, and indeed I was alone. Then I started literally missing time and finding myself in different places down in the basement. There were other things. Turned out carbon monoxide leak and poisoning. I was lucky I wasn't there for extended periods, and it was fall, so the windows were open. Once when I was home alone at night, I was just playing my Xbox when I noticed at the corner of my eye that my laptop on the other side of the room had turned the face recognition on, even though I was nowhere near it and not in its camera view, and it had been in the same exact position for about an hour without doing anything. Doesn't sound as creepy writing it down now, but I nearly sharted at the time. This was years ago at my parents' house. They were out of town for the weekend, so being a coward, I had the doors locked early, blinds shut, lights on in several rooms, had a banging on my front door, then a minute or so later, something knocking on my window. It was my asshole friend trying to scare me while his wife waited in the car. Here's a funny one. I was home alone and watching TV in the family room. It's a dark and windy night, and I think I hear something thumping outside the patio doors. I figure it's something to do with the wind, so I ignore it. The thumping continues, and suddenly I realize it sounds like somebody walking on the back patio. The curtains are closed across the patio door, so I get up, walk over, and throw the curtains open. There's a guy standing right on the other side of the glass, looking in. I jump back terrified, my heart racing. The guy jumps back also. He was as scared as I was, because he was my reflection. So, I have several experiences, but I want to preface this with, I'm not one of those ghost-chasing believers or anything. I don't believe in ghosts or anything paranormal. With that said, when I was around 12 to 15, I can't really date it better other than I had a weight bench, so I knew I wasn't younger. I was in my bedroom. It was late, and the lights were off. I can't remember if I had woken up or if it was just kind of laying there. Anyways, I happened to open my eyes, and leaning against the end of my weight bench was this shadowy figure. It had no features, but it had a human shape and basically looked, well, like shadow and purple stars. Not the elementary school 5-point stars, like looking at the night sky stars, only they were purple. I didn't know what I was looking at, but it waved at me. I don't remember anything else. I was in Nacogdoches, Texas, going to school. Roughly near the SFA campus was a Taco Bell. Anyways, I walked there for food one evening. I sat, I ate, nothing out of the ordinary. When I was done, I started walking back. Well, along the way, eventually you have to cross this super busy street. The particular crosswalk I decided to cross at, where the pedestrian stand is sort of hidden from drivers by the controller box for the traffic light. So I'm standing there, waiting for the light to change so I can cross the street. The light eventually changes, and I go to cross the street. Out of nowhere, and mid-stride, a voice says, "Why don't we wait a second?" So I stop, and literally the second I would have stepped into the street, a dude ran the red light at full speed. Would have killed me, horrifically, but a voice from nowhere saved my life. Those are two that come to mind immediately because they were so profound to me. I have others that, well, they get mocked when I talk about them. Ghostly stagecoach. I was driving with my dad, and we were in the middle of the country. We were approaching an intersection about a quarter of a mile up the road. It was approaching dusk, still plenty of light to see, and we saw a large grayish translucent cloud. If I had to compare it to a shape, my dad and I agreed that it looked most like a stagecoach. Random, I know, but still. Appear out of thin air on the left side of the intersection and slowly cross the road in front of us, and then disappear into thin air after crossing the road. It was so clear to us that my dad pretty much slammed on the brakes. We looked at each other and said, "Did you just see?" "Yup." Not sure if it's spooky, but it's something I've never experienced before, and haven't since. This is probably going to get lost down in the comment section. Nope, but here's my story. Not my house, but my great-grandmother's house. About 2 years after she died. This was in rural Pennsylvania, and as such, no one really came through, which I guess is why no one was too worried about leaving a 12-year-old home by himself in a place he wasn't familiar with. Anyway, I woke up from a nap to find everyone gone. There was a note in the kitchen, which explained they had gone into town to go see a play or something, and that if I needed anything to call them. Well, for the first 20 minutes everything was great, but then it started to storm. A really bad thunderstorm hit, and the power went out. The phone was also out because it was a landline, and we had no power. I'm scared shitless, but somehow managed to find and light candles around the house. Already on edge, I start hearing noises coming from the cellar. I do not know what possessed me to do this, but I decided to go check out the noises. Well, it turns out there was a black snake infestation in the cellar, which no one knew about since hardly anyone went to the cellar anymore after my great-grandmother died. Well, after seeing about 5 snakes right at the bottom of the steps slithering around, I lost my will to explore the rest of the cellar and ran back upstairs screaming. I slammed shut the cellar door and ran to hide in the bedroom under the bed. After what felt like hours, although in reality was only about 5 minutes later, I heard a knock on the back door. I thought I was about to be killed by some serial killer or monster, but the knock kept coming. Suddenly, as I'm going to sneak a peek at who is at the door, I hear the door unlock and someone walk in. I'm about to run screaming when suddenly I hear a man's voice calling my name. Turns out it was the neighbor who helped with my great-grandmother out a lot, and he had come over to check on me after my parents had called and told him they couldn't get a hold of me. Turns out the house wasn't possessed, and the snakes had apparently been there for years. That is still the most scared I've ever been.
I mean, call me old-fashioned or maybe call me a helicopter dad, but I just don't think it's right to leave a 12-year-old alone in a house he's never been in with no way to contact people. I don't know.
It was night, and I had to take a crap. I ran to the bathroom, but I felt the whole room having a weird vibe, and it was cold as F, being winter and the heater was on. So I went to the bathroom. I didn't close the door because I had to take this massive shit. 3 minutes in, I was on my phone minding my business until I get a vibe that someone was watching me. From my peripheral vision, I swear to God, I saw something run across the other room. I thought it was something else, but I looked to the door edge again and saw a shadow moving. I wiped, closed, and locked the door and laid my ass to sleep in the tub with the lights on. I got more scared when I woke up from a loud banging noise, but it was my dad, needing to pee. I was at the hospital visiting a friend for a few hours and then decided to go home. As I was walking to the train station, I didn't seem to notice anyone. I was alone at night on an empty street with no one in sight. I came across a traffic light and decided to wait, although no one was even driving at the time, so I don't even know why I didn't just walk to the other side real quick. Anyways, I was too distracted by my phone when I suddenly got this gut feeling to look left. There was a man walking towards me, and naturally I didn't think anything of it. The man was now standing a few feet from me, and I could visibly see him. He was wearing ripped, dirty clothes and had greasy, long hair. What creeped me out the most was his smile. He was looking at me constantly with that creepy smile, and then he started talking to me in a different language. I didn't know what to do or say, so I just stood there. The man then got angry and started yelling. Now I was really creeped out and started walking to the train station. I looked behind me, and the man was running at me with a piece of glass, and then I was too scared and started running. Luckily, a train was stopping, so I quickly hopped in. The man was for some reason not trying to come in and stood in front of the doors and looked at me with that same creepy smile. I was relieved and petrified, and that was that. I appreciate everyone who read this. I've had a couple. Not too creepy, but here goes. Just for some background, when I was a little kid, about 8, my dad died in a motorcycle accident. He was my biggest hero, an Air Force pilot, and up to this day I've kept most of his things and never really take off his bomber jacket. As I've gotten older, I started to wonder if it wasn't an accident, and if he killed himself, as he was an Afghanistan and Iraq vet, PTSD, and it made sense to me. There were no other vehicles in the accident, just his motorcycle, and he'd crashed into a fence on the highway. I've sort of gone with the assumption it wasn't an accident since then. Sometimes, when I'm home alone, I just kind of ignore the fact that my bedroom door is left open, and it often creaks open and then creaks back to its original position. This gets a bit annoying, and one time I looked at the door and said, "Dad, can you please shut the door?" It shut. After incidents like that, I've started to become more aware of the fact that it feels oddly like he's watching me. At night, I started to hear and see things. I would see faces I couldn't quite make out, and they would pop in and out of my vision, moving. I would turn my lights on, thinking it was a trick of the dark, but they would still be there, appearing then disappearing. I started hearing things shortly after. It felt like I was in the center of a crowd, everyone shouting, but I couldn't make out what they were saying, because they were quiet. My ears would proceed to ring and ring until I would open my eyes. Tons of faces and eyes would appear, and then they would stop. I'm seeing a psychiatrist soon, because I think I'm schizophrenic. I'm currently in high school and hope to be able to focus more of my work after receiving help for my troubles. I think it's related to my inability to let go of my dad. TLDR. My dad died when I was a kid. I see shit and hear shit, and I think he's related to him. I got off the bus one night coming home from work. A guy also got off at my stop, but I didn't think much of it, then started walking the couple of blocks I had to walk to get to my apartment. I heard footsteps behind me and realized that guy was still walking behind me. Okay, maybe he walks the same route, whatever. As I was getting closer to my building, I felt like the steps sounded faster, like half walk, half running toward me. I started to panic because at this time I didn't have a cell phone or any way to call for help. I noticed another man walking in the opposite side of the street, and he started crossing towards me as well. At that moment, I got to my yard and jogged up to the door and threw it open. And as I did, I heard the one behind me say, "Hey, wait," as I slammed the door shut and locked it. There was a window in the door, and we locked eyes. He was standing in the middle of the yard just staring at me, way closer than I even thought he was. He turned and said something to the guy that had been on the other side of the road that I couldn't hear, and they walked off together. I was kind of stunned as to what just happened. I had a heavy, nauseous feeling in my stomach, like I had just barely escaped something horrible. After that, I always had my boyfriend meet me at the bus stop and walk me home. I'm a female, and I do my morning jog around my neighborhood at 3 a.m. because the rest of the day I'm in school and at work. One morning I'm jogging back to my house to get ready for school. I'm at the end of my street where there's a mini forest and no street lights, and all of a sudden I hear heavy footsteps behind me. All this time, I'd been cruising along just enjoying the cold air and silence, but when I heard that I thought, hell no, not today, and took off as fast as I could towards the lit part of my street. When I felt I had run far enough, I shone my flashlight back to see if anything was there, and I didn't see anything. Needless to say, it took me an extra hour and a half the next morning to convince myself to go jogging.
As a fellow runner, and especially a trail runner as well, it's disappointing to hear not just this poster, but also my personal friends, females, that say they don't like to run alone or at night, and it limits their access because of this type of thing.
Sleep paralysis, and I have become close acquaintances over the last few months. When I go through a large amount of stress, I typically suffer from sleep paralysis, and the shit I hear is pretty unsettling. So there I was, sleeping on my cousin's couch. I'd woken up at around 3 a.m. or so due to dehydration, and to my surprise, I couldn't move a muscle. My face was buried in the couch cushion, but my ears were nice and open. I started hearing a thumbing-like sound as if someone was walking down the hallway that led directly where I was sleeping. The thumping would increase in volume as time passed by, and would eventually stop as soon as it became loud enough to be near the couch. By the time it reached the couch, I jolted up and looked down the hallway to see nothing. After about 10 minutes of freaking out, I managed to fall back to sleep, only to wake up moments later not being able to move. The same scene played out again, but this time I could see the hallway. Nothing but void darkness, darker than the hallway usually is, and darker than I'd like it to be. Then, the footsteps started. I tried closing my eyes and moving my head to look away from the hallway, but only managed to squint. As my vision blurred, the footsteps became faster, and as I opened my eyes they slowed. This continued until they reached the couch. Once that was achieved, I woke up again. I was dazed, tired, scared, shook, whatever you can use to describe this nightmare. Once I started to doze off again, I started hearing something new, crying. Not me crying, but some girl. My cousin had kids, but they aren't toddlers, and yet I heard childish crying. Then I heard the footsteps, and after that, I couldn't sleep at all. It was now 5 a.m, and I had thrown in the towel. This bout of sleep paralysis won, and I had no intention of going through a repeat.